bubble, or maybe you pull a lever, and the system tallies it up.
Yeah, it's very straightforward.
Exactly. It's counted or it's not counted. It is structural, it's clean, but then you step into a grocery store,
Right.
and you're standing there in the coffee aisle, and suddenly that voting booth is just, well, it's completely broken.
It really is.
Because you're not just a shopper anymore, you know? You're
No.
expected to be a judge, a jury, and like a global supply chain auditor all at once.
Yeah, which is exhausting.
It is. And the question that haunts us every single time we stare at those two different brands of coffee is whether picking the fair trade bag actually changes the global economy, or, I mean, is it just a really expensive way to buy a clear conscience? Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are looking at a single, highly detailed source document today. It's titled, "Is Consumer Boycotting a Meaningful Moral Tool?" And the mission of this deep dive is to figure out if consumer activism is a legitimate lever of power or just an illusion of control.
The illusion of control is, it's the perfect entry point for this. Because for the vast majority of human history, buying something was a completely local, visible transaction.
Right, you bought from the person down the street.
Exactly. But today, it is a profoundly abstracted global event. We are constantly making choices about what to eat, what to wear, which technology to use. It's just the mundane background noise of our existence.
Yeah.
But the moment you deliberately refuse to buy from a company, whether that's due to labor abuses or environmental destruction or discriminatory policies or even political donations, that background noise becomes a highly charged political act.
You are basically attempting to weaponize your mundane daily routine.
Exactly. You're turning a simple errand into a protest.
And we are doing this against a machine of unfathomable scale. I mean, if a multinational corporation makes $10 billion a year and I decide to withhold my $5 purchase, I am essentially trying to drain the ocean with a teaspoon.
The math is brutal.
It is. It brings up this massive individual paradox. If my personal refusal to buy their product is statistically meaningless to their bottom line, what is the actual point? Why even bother?
That paradox right there is the fault line, dividing two major schools of ethical thought, which our source actually breaks down beautifully.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So on one side, you have the consequentialist view. And consequentialism, as the name implies, is completely obsessed with outcomes.
So it's all about the results.
Right. It is the accountant's approach to morality. From this perspective, an action is only morally valuable if it produces a measurable, real-world result.
So the consequentialist looks at my withheld $5.
Yep. They look at your $5, they look at the $10 billion corporate revenue, they see that the company's behavior didn't change at all, and they conclude that your individual boycott is completely ineffective.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, they would say it has zero instrumental value.
So consequentialism just looks at the math. If my $5 doesn't dent their billions, it's a failed action. But, I mean, that feels incredibly cynical.
It's very cold.
Yeah, almost paralyzing. Surely there's value in just refusing to participate in something gross, even if you can't bankrupt the bad actor single-handedly, right?
Which is exactly where the second lens comes in, and this is the integrity approach.
Integrity.
Right. The integrity argument pushes back hard on the idea that morality is just some spreadsheet of outcomes. It argues that morality is fundamentally about what you participate in, what you endorse, and really what kind of person you choose to be in the world.
So it's more about personal values.
Exactly. It's the old adage that integrity is what you do when no one is watching, but applied to the global market.
I think about this like paying a cover charge at a club.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Imagine there's a nightclub in your town, and you know for an absolute fact that the owner treats the staff terribly. Like, they steal tips, they scream at the bartenders, the conditions are just super toxic.
Yeah, an awful place to work.
Exactly. If you pay the $20 cover charge to go in and dance, your money is literally keeping the lights on in that building. You are sustaining the environment where that abuse happens.
That cover charge analogy perfectly illustrates the concept of consumer responsibility.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because when you hand over your money, you are not merely receiving a product in return.
What else am I doing?
You are sending a signal of market demand. You are contributing to their revenue stream. You are bolstering their investor confidence.
Wow, okay.
Basically, you are feeding the exact mechanism that allows the abuse to continue.
And so, from the integrity standpoint, boycotting is just a refusal to pay the cover charge. You are saying, I do not want my fingerprints on this.
Right, you're opting out of the system.
Yeah, I do not want my labor, translated into currency, to sustain behavior that crosses my moral baseline. It's like drawing a line in the sand.
What's fascinating here is that this distinction completely rescues the individual boycott from the consequentialist trap we talked about earlier.
Because you're not measuring it by whether the club closed down.
Exactly. Even if one consumer cannot force a corporate policy change, even if that abusive nightclub stays open forever, refusing support preserves that person's moral integrity.
It's a refusal to be complicit.
Yes. So your boycott matters symbolically and personally, even if it completely fails instrumentally in the broader market. You didn't stop the machine, but you refuse to be the fuel for it.
But let's push this a little further, because personal integrity is great for, sleeping at night. But if we actually want to change the world, we can't just act in isolation.
No, absolutely not.
If one person withholding $5 is a symbol, a personal boundary, what happens when we scale that up? I mean, the mechanics of the market have to shift when it's not just one person, but 10,000 or 10 million people.
Well, the math flips entirely at that point.
It has to.
It does.
Yeah.
When individual moral integrity organizes into collective action, the consequentialist suddenly has to pay attention. We are no longer talking about a rounding error in a corporate ledger.
Right, it's not just $5 anymore.
No, we are talking about a massive, coordinated disruption of capital. But, and this is key, the impact of a scaled-up boycott isn't just about the immediate loss of revenue at the cash register. The financial damage is actually more like a multi-headed hydra.
Okay, break down how that hydra attacks the company. Because I think most of us assume it's just about missed sales quotas, right? Like, they didn't sell enough coffee this month.
Missed sales are just the first bite. The deeper, much more severe damage actually happens in the boardroom.
How so?
Well, a massive, organized boycott introduces extreme volatility. And if there's one thing institutional investors absolutely despise, it is volatility.
Right, they want safe bets.
Exactly. It shakes stock confidence. Furthermore, you have the internal metric of employee morale. Modern corporations rely so heavily on recruiting and keeping top talent.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about the employees.
It's huge. When a company is under a massive moral boycott, retention just plummets. Top-tier employees do not want to work for a pariah. They walk out, they leak internal documents, they push back against management.
So the true strength of a boycott is never just the isolated individual acting in a vacuum. The real strength is the organized movement.
Precisely. If you are acting entirely alone, you are really just practicing moral hygiene.
Moral hygiene, I like that term.
Yeah. But if you want to change the corporation, you must recruit others. The goal has to shift from personal purity to collective leverage.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because even when we organize into these massive collective movements, we still tend to fixate on the financial hydra you just described.
We do, yeah.
We think the goal is always to bankrupt the bad actor or force their stock to plummet. But according to the source, sometimes a boycott isn't actually a financial weapon at all. Sometimes it's a flare gun.
A flare gun. I love that. Explain the mechanism of that for the listener.
Well, think about being stranded at sea. You don't fire a flare gun because the tiny spark is going to magically build you a new boat, right?
Right, that would be absurd.
You fire it to illuminate the dark sky. You fire it to force everyone around you to look at an emergency. A boycott is a form of moral speech.
Yes, exactly.
It communicates a deeply visible message to governments, to other corporations, and to fellow citizens that a line has been crossed and the status quo is just no longer acceptable.
That aligns beautifully with how the source describes the expressive function of boycotts.
Expressive function.
Yeah, because public morality is incredibly malleable. It depends entirely on what societies choose to tolerate, what they quietly normalize, and what they loudly condemn.
So the boycott makes it loud.
Exactly. When a massive group of people fires that flare gun, they are shifting the Overton window of what corporate behavior is deemed acceptable.
It's the amplification of the issue. You
Yeah.
fire the flare, the media sees the flare, then the politicians see the media seeing the flare.
And suddenly, the company's behavior is under a massive microscope, completely, regardless of whether their quarterly earnings actually dropped.
And the reputational risk created by that flare is often far more terrifying to a CEO than a temporary dip in sales, right?
Oh, absolutely. The PR department has to scramble. Long-term brand equity is suddenly threatened.
It forces those major institutional investors who usually just rubber stamp corporate decisions to start asking very uncomfortable questions at the annual board meetings.
Right. The moral speech aspect of the boycott can force behavioral change purely through the threat of permanent brand toxicity.
So we've established that boycotts can work either as financial leverage or as a flare gun illuminating bad behavior. But if boycotts are like a flare gun drawing attention to a burning building, the absolute worst thing we could do is mistake firing the flare for actually putting out the fire.
That is probably the most devastating critique of consumer activism explored in the source.
The distraction factor.
Yes, the danger of privatization. When we rely solely on boycotts, we are taking massive, systemic, structural problems and reducing them to individual shopping choices.
And we're talking about immense structural problems here. The issues that typically spark these massive boycotts are things like multinational labor exploitation, industrial-scale pollution, unchecked monopoly power.
And sophisticated corporate tax evasion.
Right.
These are not issues that can be solved simply by a subset of consumers deciding to buy a different brand of soap.
No, obviously not.
They require aggressive legal enforcement, the organization of global labor unions, antitrust litigation, and sweeping political reform.
Real structural change.
Exactly. The critique here is that consumer activism is too individualistic. It acts as a pressure release valve.
Yeah.
People fire the flare gun, they feel a sense of moral accomplishment, and then they go home, leaving the underlying legal structures completely untouched.
We're basically taking the burden off of governments and regulatory bodies, the fire department in this analogy, and placing it squarely onto the shoulders of exhausted individuals pushing a cart through a grocery store. The message becomes, you can fix global injustice, but only if you buy the right crackers.
It is a dangerous shifting of responsibility, and it relies on a very flawed premise about who exactly can participate in this kind of activism.
But I want to challenge this critique for a second, just to play devil's advocate. Isn't telling people to vote with their dollars and buy the ethical product inherently empowering?
It certainly feels that way.
Right. It gives you, the listener, direct, tangible control over your tiny corner of the world. It's actionable. It cures the apathy of feeling like the government is just too slow or too corrupt to do anything.
It feels empowering, yes, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source presents a really harsh reality about the economics of that empowerment.
Yeah.
Relying heavily on ethical consumption unintentionally turns morality into a luxury item.
A luxury item. Okay, break down the economics of that. Why is morality a luxury?
Consider the resources required to be a perfectly ethical consumer. First of all, there is a literal financial premium. Products that are ethically sourced, meaning they don't rely on exploited migrant labor or environmental dumping or cheap toxic materials, they are almost universally more expensive.
That's true. Fair trade coffee definitely costs more than the mass-produced stuff.
Locally sourced, union-made clothing costs significantly more than fast fashion.
So there's a hard, undeniable financial barrier to entry for this kind of morality.
A severe one. But beyond just the financial cost, there's a massive cognitive load. A time tax, if you will.
A time tax?
Yes. To be an ethical shopper, you have to possess the free time and the mental energy to constantly research the deeply opaque supply chains of everything you purchase.
Oh, man.
You have to read the NGO reports, track the corporate mergers, verify the certifications on the packaging.
Which means if you are, say, a single parent working 2 jobs, just trying to put the highest amount of calories on the table for the lowest possible price, you are entirely priced out of this moral exercise. You just don't have the luxury of spending $4 extra on the good coffee, and you certainly don't have 3 hours on a Tuesday night to research the labor practices of the conglomerate that manufactured your kids' shoes.
Exactly. So when society holds up consumer activism as the ultimate solution for global justice, we're implicitly stating that only the wealthy have the means to be truly moral actors.
Wow. Yeah, that's a bleak way to look at it.
It abandons the vast majority of people who are economically constrained. And this is why critics argue so vehemently that shopping can never be a substitute for politics.
Because politics is supposed to be for everyone.
Right. Politics, voting, legislating, organizing, that is the mechanism for changing the baseline rules of society for everyone, completely regardless of their disposable income.
So we need the flare gun to draw attention, but we absolutely require the fire department of political and legal action to show up and actually rewrite the fire codes. You cannot shop your way to a robust legal framework.
It is a profound category error to even try.
Okay, so let's play out a scenario. Let's say you, the listener, can afford to shop ethically.
Okay, let's assume that.
You have the disposable income, you are willing to pay the time tax to do all the research, and you are ready to wield your wallet as a moral tool. The next massive hurdle we have to address is actually finding the truth in the global market. the fog of war, so to speak.
The information problem. It is arguably the most intractable, practical barrier to a justified, effective boycott.
Because modern supply chains are, well, they're purposefully designed to be incomprehensible.
Yes, they are.
Let's trace a hypothetical product just to illustrate the sheer madness of what a consumer is actually supposed to audit. Let's say you want to buy a new smartphone,
Okay.
and you want to ensure absolutely no exploited labor or environmental devastation went into making it.
A noble but practically impossible task.
Right. Because think about it, the raw materials like the cobalt, the lithium for the battery, they're mined in country A, often by unregulated subcontractors using informal labor. Then those materials are shipped to country B, where they are refined in these massive industrial chemical plants.
Then the microchips are manufactured in country C using highly proprietary technology.
Exactly. And the entire device is finally assembled in country D in a factory employing hundreds of thousands of people.
And don't forget the logistics, the shipping, the maritime insurance. That's all handled out of country E.
Yeah. And the parent company, whose shiny, recognizable logo is actually on the box, they are headquartered in country F. But the kicker is, they don't actually own the mines or the refineries or the assembly factories.
No, they utilize thousands of independent subcontractors.
And those subcontractors subcontract to other entities.
It's endless. And this labyrinthine structure is not an accident. It is a feature of globalization designed specifically to minimize cost and maximize legal distance from liability.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. Consumers simply lack reliable, accessible information about the working conditions, the true carbon emissions, or the political maneuverings embedded at every single layer of that supply chain.
And as we know, nature abhors a vacuum. So where there is a lack of hard, transparent information, what rushes in to fill the void?
Misinformation, viral outrage, rumors, and, frankly, sophisticated political manipulation.
This is where the flare gun analogy gets super dangerous, because if a boycott is a form of moral speech, launching a boycott based on like a manipulated TikTok video or a decontextualized quote, that isn't activism. It's just moral slander.
It is reckless endangerment of a company's workforce based on a vibe. In the digital age, a boycott can ignite literally overnight.
Oh yeah, we see it all the time.
Millions of people can mobilize to destroy a brand's reputation before journalists or auditors even have a chance to verify the original claim. A serious, ethically justified boycott requires hard, empirical evidence of harm. Without it, consumers are just a mob firing weapons in the dark.
Which perfectly explains another huge vulnerability in consumer activism, which is our deeply selective morality. I mean, why are we so eager to burn down one company for a scandal, but we completely ignore a nearly identical scandal at another company?
Because human attention is a finite resource, and it is incredibly susceptible to tribalism. Our moral attention is dictated by the media cycle and algorithmic trends.
Right, whatever's trending.
Exactly. If the news cycle focuses on Company X for a week, Company X becomes the ultimate villain. Meanwhile, Company Y is engaged in the exact same labor exploitation, but because they didn't trend on social media, they get a total free pass.
It's also about convenience, isn't it? The friction of the boycott.
Convenience plays a massive role, yes. We demand pristine, impossible moral standards from a company that happens to be an easy target like, say, a random fast food chain, where we can just easily eat somewhere else.
Right, there are a million burger places.
But we willfully ignore the horrific supply chain practices of the tech monopolies that make our phones because untangling ourselves from that ecosystem is just too painful, too inconvenient.
We say, you know, I'll boycott this chicken sandwich because I have 5 other options on the exact same block, but I'm not giving up my smartphone because I literally need it for my job.
It really reveals how often boycotts are driven by convenience and political identity, rather than universal ethical principles. Now, I should say, the source material is careful to point out that this inconsistency does not render all boycotts automatically meaningless.
Because humans are messy.
Right. Human
Good
beings
works.
are inherently contradictory.
Yeah.
But it does highlight why moral consistency is something we must aggressively strive for if we want these economic protests to carry true, undeniable weight.
But let's look at the absolute heaviest ethical question of this entire deep dive. This is something every single person needs to chew on before they join an economic protest.
Yeah.
Let's say you get everything right.
Okay.
You pierce the fog of war. You have the hard, verified evidence. The company is definitively engaged in serious wrongdoing. You organize a massive collective boycott. It goes viral. The stock plummets. Sales totally collapse. You win.
You successfully starve the beast.
Right. But who actually starves? Like, who actually bears the brunt of that economic collapse?
Ah, the collateral damage dilemma. This is the tragic, often completely unspoken irony of economic protests. If a boycott succeeds in corporate revenue craters, the immediate financial pain almost never reaches the CEO, the board of directors, or the major shareholders first.
Because they have a buffer.
A huge one. They're insulated by golden parachutes, diversified portfolios, and immense personal wealth.
They just move their capital to a different sector.
Exactly. So the fallout doesn't hit the architects of the bad behavior. The fallout travels rapidly down the hierarchy and violently hits the most vulnerable people in the chain.
Walk us through the domino effect of that. Let's say we boycott a massive garment brand because of abusive conditions in their overseas factories. What actually happens when their sales drop by, say, 40%?
Well, the corporate headquarters in New York or London doesn't take a pay cut. Instead, they immediately cancel their upcoming orders with those overseas factories.
Right.
The factory owner, who operates on razor-thin margins anyway, suddenly has zero revenue, so they shut down the factory. The thousands of low-paid workers on that floor, the very people the boycott was ostensibly trying to help, are abruptly fired with zero severance.
And it doesn't even stop there, does it?
No, it bleeds into the surrounding community. The local food vendors who sold lunches outside the factory gates go bankrupt. The logistics drivers lose their routes.
The ripple effect is huge.
It is. Even the small business franchise owners back in the home country who had absolutely zero input on corporate sourcing decisions, they see their life savings wiped out as foot traffic stops.
So a tool that is wielded from a distance to defend exploited workers can end up being the precise mechanism that destroys their livelihood and plunges their entire community into much deeper poverty.
Yes, the company responds to the boycott by closing the factory, cutting wages, and firing the people we were trying to save.
That is a devastating moral equation. How do we even justify that? Is there any scenario where inflicting that kind of collateral damage is ethically permissible?
There is one crucial caveat, and it changes the moral math entirely. The collateral damage is justified when the workers themselves explicitly request the boycott.
Oh, I see.
If a local labor union or an organized collective of the workers steps forward and says, "We are willing to endure the short-term economic devastation of a boycott in order to force this company to the negotiating table," then it is their leverage to use.
They are consenting to the pain for long-term gain.
Because they have agency in that scenario.
Right.
Exactly. But when affluent consumers impose a boycott from the outside, without consulting the workers on the ground, without understanding the local economic fragility, they risk doing immense, irreversible harm just in the name of feeling morally righteous.
Okay, we have zoomed way, way out. We've navigated the personal philosophy, the massive scale of global markets, the systemic flaws of replacing politics with shopping, the misinformation vacuum, and the very real human collateral damage.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. So given all of these monumental risks, how can you, the listener, actually engage in a boycott that is morally sound? We really need a framework to cut through the fog here.
We do. And the first step in building a better, more ethical boycott is drawing a very hard line between a true boycott and its modern, highly toxic cousin.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture, exactly.
This is such a vital distinction because those two terms are used interchangeably in the media every single day. How does the source separate the mechanics of a boycott from cancel culture?
It fundamentally comes down to the ultimate objective of the action. A boycott, in its purest, most ethical form, is about withdrawing economic support to seek accountability and specific reform.
It's conditional.
Yes, it is conditional. It is the consumer saying, "I will not buy this product until you change this specific harmful behavior."
So it's basically a negotiation tactic.
Precisely. Cancel culture, on the other hand, is generally characterized by a desire for complete social and economic destruction.
Just wiping them out.
Right. It often involves personal harassment, doxing, threats, a demand for permanent exclusion from society, and collective punishment of anyone even vaguely associated with the target. A boycott wants the company or the individual to reform and do better. Cancel culture just wants the target annihilated.
A morally defensible boycott leaves a chair open at the table. It says, fix the problem and we will return. It's about accountability, not vengeance.
And to ensure your boycott remains an instrument of accountability rather than a weapon of vengeance, the source provides a comprehensive ethical framework.
Oh, like a checklist.
Exactly. It's a series of criteria that consumers should rigorously test their outrage against before they participate in any economic strike.
Let's test a hypothetical through these criteria. Let's say a massive regional grocery store chain is accused of severely underpaying their warehouse staff, and a viral campaign starts demanding a total boycott of all their stores. How do we know if it's justified?
Okay, so the first test is the seriousness of the harm. Is the harm severe enough to warrant economic disruption?
Because we don't want to overreact to small things.
Right. We're trying to avoid turning every minor disagreement, every slightly tone-deaf ad campaign, or every single PR gaffe into an all-out economic war. But if the grocery chain is structurally underpaying warehouse staff to the point of poverty, that definitely constitutes serious systemic harm.
Okay, so it passes the seriousness test. The next criterion is the evidence.
Is the evidence reliable? You absolutely cannot base a boycott on a single angry Reddit post or a decontextualized TikTok video from one disgruntled former employee.
You need actual proof.
You must demand journalistic rigor, legal filings, or coordinated statements from the workers themselves. If a reputable labor organization has published an audit confirming the wage theft, then you have reliable evidence.
Then we have to look at targeting. Is the connection to the company clear?
Yes, you must ensure the target is actually responsible for or directly benefiting from the harm.
How might that get confused?
Well, if the warehouse is entirely owned and operated by a completely separate third-party logistics company, and the grocery store is just one of their 50 clients, boycotting the grocery store might be misdirected fire. You need to target the entity that actually controls the abuse.
This naturally leads into the criterion of proportionality. How do you measure if a demand is proportionate?
The economic punishment must fit the crime. If the wage dispute at the grocery chain is limited to one specific regional warehouse because of a rogue local manager, demanding the complete dissolution of the entire national grocery corporation is wildly disproportionate.
Right, you don't break down the whole house for one termite.
Exactly. The demand must scale with the offense.
And then we must run the collateral damage check that we talked about earlier.
Have you considered who bears the costs? If you boycott the grocery store, the first people to lose their shifts are the teenage cashiers and the elderly greeters, who have absolutely nothing to do with warehouse logistics. Are the warehouse workers asking for this boycott, knowing it might hurt the retail staff? Or is this an external mob imposing their will?
Which brings us to the final and honestly perhaps the most important test. Is the goal actually change?
The strongest, most ethical boycotts aim toward reform by presenting incredibly clear, achievable demands.
Because if you just tweet, "This grocery store is evil, never shop there again," you haven't given them a path to fix it. There's no win state.
Exactly. Saying, we will not shop here until the warehouse workers union is formally recognized and the stolen wages are repaid, is infinitely more effective than vague outrage. Clear demands prevent a boycott from devolving into just a theater of endless performative anger.
It gives the target a specific roadmap to regain consumer trust.
Yes. If your goal is truly to change the world, you must tell the world precisely how it can be changed.
But let's flip the script completely here. What if, instead of constantly playing defense and punishing the bad actors, we go on the offense and actively reward the good ones? The source introduces this concept as the boycott.
Ah, the boycott. It is a brilliant shift in market momentum. Instead of just withdrawing support from harmful practices, you deliberately redirect your economic power toward ethical companies, local producers, fair trade cooperatives, and businesses with transparent pro-worker policies.
It's the carrot instead of the stick. You are proactively funding the world you actually want to live in, rather than just defunding the one you hate.
And a truly sophisticated approach to consumer activism combines both mechanisms simultaneously.
A double whammy.
Yeah. You boycott the exploitative multinational corporation, and you boycott the local worker-owned cooperative. It transforms consumer morality from a purely negative, exhausting protest into a positive, constructive encouragement of better market behavior.
I love the idea of the boycott, I really do. But I have to push back with one final dose of reality. Looking at this entire landscape, the opaque supply chains, the collateral damage, the sheer scale of global capital, it is utterly exhausting.
It is a lot to carry.
Because global markets are so deeply entangled, right? Almost everything involves low-wage labor somewhere in its history, or fossil fuels in its shipping. Is perfect ethical consumption even physically possible? Or are we just doomed to be hypocrites no matter what we do?
You are brushing up against a profound philosophical concept known as moral demandingness.
Moral demandingness.
Yes. The theory explores what happens when ethical theories ask too much of ordinary people. If consumers were required to avoid every single morally compromised product, life in the modern industrialized world would become physically impossible.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't be able to buy a phone, you couldn't drive a car, you couldn't heat your home, and you probably couldn't even buy a tomato at the grocery store without finding some trace of exploitation in the fertilizer supply chain.
Perfect ethical purity is an absolute myth. If you demand it of yourself, you will just become paralyzed with guilt. If you demand it of others, you become a tyrant.
So what's the alternative then? We just throw our hands up and let ourselves off the hook, like, oh, it's all corrupt, so I'll just buy whatever is cheapest.
Not at all. Acknowledging that perfection is impossible does not absolve us of responsibility. Morality does not require flawless purity. It requires reasonable attention and deliberate effort.
Okay, reasonable attention.
It means taking decisive action in the most serious, clear-cut cases of abuse. It means participating in collective, organized efforts where your voice and your wallet can actually tip the scales. It is about doing the absolute best you can with the limited information, time, and resources you have, without spiraling into despair over your inevitable complicity in a flawed system.
So we have zoomed all the way into the personal philosophy of the $5 purchase, and we've zoomed all the way out to the complexities of global supply chains, collateral damage, and the limits of moral demandingness. We have mapped the terrain.
We certainly have.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring down the final verdict on the core question of our deep dive.
The verdict presented by the analysis is that, yes, consumer boycotting is a highly meaningful moral tool, but it comes with massive non-negotiable asterisks.
It is only meaningful when it is heavily informed by hard evidence, when it is scaled through collective organization, when it is precisely targeted, and when it is tethered to crystal clear demands for reform.
Exactly. It can express profound moral refusal, it can devastate corporate reputation, and it can pressure deeply entrenched institutions toward actual reform. But if there is one crucial overarching takeaway from our exploration today, it is this. Boycotts are only truly strong when they are the vanguard for actual politics.
The vanguard.
Yes. Your wallet is a moral tool, yes, but it is not, and can never be, a complete theory of political responsibility.
You cannot just shop your way to a just, equitable society.
You cannot. Individual purchasing choices, no matter how ethically pure, cannot replace the hard work of writing law, organizing labor, passing legislation, and building regulatory frameworks. You are not just a customer choosing between brightly colored boxes on a shelf.
Right.
You are a citizen. You are a worker. You are a voter. A meaningful approach to changing the world recognizes that while individual market choices matter, collective democratic power matters infinitely more.
As we wrap up our analysis of this source, the text leaves us with 3 incredibly pointed questions that we want you, the listener, to actively ponder the next time you are standing in a store. First, if you strongly, fundamentally condemn a company's behavior, do you feel you have a personal, non-negotiable duty to stop buying from them?
That's the integrity question.
Right. Second, does refusing to participate matter morally, even if you know for a fact that your personal choice has absolutely zero measurable impact on that company's revenue? And third, are we actively weakening our political systems when we try to solve massive structural social problems through our shopping lists instead of our voting booths and our organizing efforts?
Those are fundamental questions about how we define our agency in a capitalist society. But this raises an important question, a new one actually. Building on the mechanics of everything we've explored today, I have a thought experiment for you to consider about the future of this moral fog.
Oh, okay. Where is this heading?
Consider the rapid global shift toward a cashless, entirely digitized economy. We're talking central bank digital currencies, ubiquitous mobile payments, the complete elimination of physical, untraceable cash.
It's happening fast, yeah.
If this trend continues to its logical endpoint, it means every single purchase we make will be perfectly tracked, permanently recorded, and tied to our digital identities.
Every single one.
Imagine a future where your entire shopping history, every cup of coffee, every gallon of gas, every piece of clothing, becomes publicly accessible data or is visible to algorithms governing your life.
A permanent ledger of your every consumption choice. That's intense.
Exactly. If that happens, will the choice to boycott or boycott no longer be a personal, silent protest of moral integrity? Will it become a mandatory public declaration? Will we eventually be assigned a social or moral credit score based entirely on our grocery receipts, where society constantly judges our compliance with the ethical trends of the week? Will the digitization of capital force every single consumer to be a permanent, exhausted, hyper-visible activist just to maintain their standing in society?
Wow. If the voting booth is supposed to be fiercely private and the grocery store becomes totally, ruthlessly public, that completely flips the script on what it means to participate in the economy. Suddenly, that murky moral fog of the supermarket aisle isn't just confusing, it's a permanent record. It's a terrifying, fascinating thing to really think about the next time you're standing there, staring at those two different brands, wondering what your choice is actually saying to the world. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking for the truth in the fog, and we will see you next time.